everybody, welcome to Drive Through Review 817. Today we're going to review the League of Dungeoneers Advanced Bestiary Volume 1. Now this is the, I think, second expansion for League of Dungeoneers. There was a kind of a big box expansion. And then they also sort of simultaneously or just before this came out, released a PDF called New Beginnings, which is just a new set of introductory scenarios, like a new storyline to introduce new characters into the world, which is nice. I've played through the three times through the introductory scenario bits myself, so it's nice to spice things up. Because if you haven't played the game before, the game kind of just opens up and you can kind of go do what you want to do in a sense after that introductory setup. So it's nice to have kind of an alternative way to do that, because then the variability just is enormous after that. What this expansion though is as it says, it's an advanced bestiary. It has a bunch of lore, which is nice to have. It's got some new rules, some new monsters to take a look at, some new playable classes, some updates to like the difficulty, as well as this is up for pre-order, I believe, right now on their site, and I'll have links to this. And I think you can either order the book by itself, or you can kind of order a package, which will be the book plus some cards plus some standees as a package deal. I'll have a link to it on the site, so you can go to the site and look. I will also have a link to a kind of a game found pledge manager. So there are also, in addition to the cardboard standees, which I'll show you, there will be coming acrylic standees. And I'm excited for that. I backed that pledge for that because all of my stuff has been converted to acrylic standees, which are awesome. And I'll have also a link below to a video I did on kind of the initial wave of acrylic standees, so you can get a sense of what those are like. They're really great. I recommend them. Even if you like just maybe one of them, use them for D&D or some other dungeon crawl game, I'd use them. They're pretty cool. But we're gonna go down to the table here, take a look at the book, flip through it a little bit. I'll kind of highlight some of the key features of it, and just show you the other stuff that you can get. But the most important thing is this book. Okay, so here's everything that's newly available, except of course for the New Beginnings PDF. So you can get cards, book, and standees. I think they're all separate on the web store. I'm not 100% sure about that right now. But let's look at the cards real quickly here. So we have here monster cards. These are just reference cards. Have stat lines, special abilities, hit points, experience, treasure, and so on. So these will get mixed in with your base game. You have some new level 6 spells. Spells only went up to level 5 before, so these are a new addition. And then you also have here, I think these are mostly replacements, different treasure cards, so these will replace some of the base game ones. And then also some travel events as well for Wilderness, and then also for the roads. In addition, you can get these standees. Now, I don't remember if I mentioned this at the beginning, but you can also go get the acrylic ones. I'll put a link to the acrylic video. Yeah, I did mention that. So if you want to take a look at how those look for some of the other models, you can see. But I just wanted to show a couple of these for some of the new playable races and classes. So Frogling Ranger there, Frogling Rogue. Let's see there. We've got a Pale Goblin Warrior. You can be a Pale Orc or Pale Goblin. And you'll notice that the frogs are agender, so there is no gender. I think is that true of frogs? I'm not sure, actually. Probably depends on the frog. But yeah, so the frogling's there, but you can also be male or female on the Pale Goblins and Pale Orcs. Here's a Pale Goblin Ranger. Let's show you a couple others. Here is a Frogling Druid. And then we have here, let's look at some others. That is a Pale Orc Druid, and so on. And you got some other things here, like the large ice elemental. Here is a large sand elemental, a Drider Witch, and so on. Let's just take a look at a couple more. Don't want to spend a ton of time on this. So here we've got a Pale Orc Druid, male, Pale Orc Rogue, male, plus this large mud elemental. What's some other? Here's a neat one. This is a Chimera. You can see that there in the middle. Here's a Pale Orc Warrior there. Pale Orc Ranger. Different ones. Don't want to spend too much time on the standees. You can take a look at them on the website, and also the acrylic ones if you wish. So let's zoom in here, take a look at this book. Okay, so here's the book, the main event, and you've got, you can see a nice wraparound cover here with some undead waylaying either this villager or possibly a level 1 character. So we'll just crack this open, take a look here at the table of contents. We can see a large section of the book here is all of the various animals and beasts and stuff like that. Probably about that much of the book. And then a little bit on playable races, some new playable races and classes, and also some updates to some previous ones. And then a little bit of a slight rule change or encounter change, I should say, to make things more difficult for level 5 and higher. So let's take a look here at the overall layout of the book. A little bit of how to read it, which I'll explain now. So here your first section is the animals, a little bit of background, and then throughout the book you'll have these little short kind of lore passages. Sometimes there are a couple of paragraphs, usually not longer than a page. But these are just little flavorful things to interject into the world. Now, as you get to each of the different entries, you've got the stat lines here, special rules, special abilities for the different types. There may be multiple types of bear, for example, a cave bear, frost bear, mountain bear, and so on. And then some background information to kind of world build and add some kind of lore and sort of ground, what would just be like a generic bear into this particular world. And then you've got this little sort of inset here, this little parchment on each of the different creatures that you can fight in the game. And this is suggested to be for like a game master, dungeon master. And so it kind of shows you where you might find them, some of their strengths and weaknesses. One gameplay use here is the alchemical use. So you can see, what do these guys give up here? If you go to basically forge them and sort of break them down for components. And that's what these are for here. Now the neat part about this is that it kind of has two purposes, right? You have sort of you can take this and have it as like kind of a coffee table book or just for some light reading in the evenings. That's how the designer kind of explained it to me. So you can just take and read this and kind of sort of flesh out the world a little bit for your own entertainment and appreciation. But also it gives you kind of some sort of ballpark guidelines if you were to have a game master, dungeon master who wanted to kind of run a game instead of doing, co-op or solo. You could have a one versus many, or like I said, a dungeon master. And struck me, I really like this approach because there's a lot of games kind of in this sort of vein, these big epic dungeon crawlers that try to do both. They try to do, solo co-op, completely procedurally driven, all that stuff. Everything's driven by the game mechanics, card flips, and so on. This says, okay, here's some cool background information to help you with your storytelling, with your world building. But if you like, you can just keep the mechanics that are built into the game. It's not going to say, here's a completely, totally different way to play the game. And just, you have that cognitive load of like, okay, what I do this when, and then when I'm playing it with a dungeon master, I play it this way, and so on. It's just like, okay, use the mechanics that is presented, and then here's some stuff to help you like flesh out, the world and the different characters and the different creatures and sort of their reasoning and their habitat and their behaviors and all that kind of stuff. And then you can of course break the rules of all of that. So that is a really cool thing, and I think that's one of the coolest parts of the book. I'll talk more about that in the review part. But yeah, that's just a kind of a neat sort of super efficient, hands-off way to like let people play the game how they want, which they could of course already do, but then kind of gives you just that little bit of a nudge there in terms of like storytelling and generating ideas and all that kind of stuff. So let's flip up a little bit. So here we're at the playable races section, so you can see a lot of that, all that lore building, all that creature stuff, the new creatures and everything in here is this much of the book. The rest of the book, which is mostly gameplay focused, is this part, which is still a good sizable amount. Now the one thing you'll notice here, there's some new playable races, but there's updates to existing. So for the dwarves here, we've got a repeat of the stat line and traits and limitations and stuff. But then some more background information. Then you've got some different, more like specific dwarf clans. Black dwarves, gray dwarves, gold dwarves, red dwarves, and they have different modifiers. So if you want to sort of make your characters like a little bit more specific and grounded into like a specific locale, you can do that here with the dwarves. And you've got a name generator if you like. You can have that for all of these. Here's the duck folk, which I'm going to skip over. I don't really like duck folk for some reason. However, I like the froglings, so I don't know, makes me a bad person, I think. Now here also the elves, you have different elves. So you've got the moon elves, the high elves, the frost elves, and which is not a playable race, and they also the wood elves up here. And so these, again, another kind of like way to play with sort of specific types of elves, which is neat. Here's a section on froglings. This is just some new information there. Let's skip ahead here to the playable orcs and goblins. So you have pale orcs and pale goblins. These are the pale skins. And so here's just some background information here. You know, all the same stuff, name generation. Here's some trait definitions and so on. And then just some other information about characters in general here. So just a nice quick reference sort of at the end of all the different races and stuff. So that's cool. You got the 3 new playable races and then some updates to at least 2 of them. Now you have some overviews of monster behaviors and stuff. And I think this is slightly updated to what's in the base game. I don't think there's any big deviation there. The main part is, and here's a nice sort of one-stop shop for all the special rules for all the different monsters and things you'll encounter. And then also this is where the update happens for level 5 and above. So these tables have changed slightly. Now they also have the new monsters and all that stuff in it as well, but also makes it a little bit more difficult and challenging once you get to level 5. So that's a nice little addition there. I think that's a good call. So yeah, that is pretty much everything that's in the book. There's also, here we go, creature index, so you can just look them up in alphabetical order and then go right to their description page and, you know, learn more about them. So if you want to figure out all that stuff, you can get in there. So anyway, that's kind of the package that you will be getting. Okay, so that was a little bit of an overview of the advanced bestiary. I'm not going to do my normal pillars of review at all, and just say I like how this is presented. A couple of things I like about it is the updates to make it more difficult at level 5 and higher. I think that's a good, smart move there. I like, again, I talked about it a little bit at length during the overview, but I like the sort of addressing of possibly playing the game as a role-playing game. And 2 parts of that. One, I just like that there's a lot more lore and short stories, and you can kind of just take and read this book like in your spare time and just sort of color up the world and flesh it out a little bit more, which I think is nice. I would say, you know, the game didn't really feel like it was lacking, you know, world building or lore. Frankly, it was there, but there wasn't a lot of like supplementary text either, like a lot of flavor text, really. But it did come through, I think, in the quests and sort of the way those were written. They all kind of like made sense. There was a cohesion to it, and certain things would happen in certain parts of the world, and, you know, you kind of like, it gave you tools to kind of flesh out like different backgrounds for your characters that would, you know, tie you down to certain settlements and things like that. And just kind of the general, I don't know, the terrain of the world. There was the ancient lands in the bottom, and then the dwarven mines later, and that kind of thing. So it kind of like naturally sort of emerged the storytelling, but it didn't give you like little flavorful bits to color out, you know, like I was talking about through the walkthrough. There was like, oh, it's a giant slug. Okay. It's like generic fantasy giant slug. So this kind of fleshes it out, just with some colorful text and some flavor text. And so the stuff that could be a little bit sort of just abstract and plain and generic has been boosted in a sense. So now I think the game's kind of like, it got a good sort of marriage of what I thought was really good sort of storytelling and just narrative direction that was given to you by the quests. You know, this complements that very nicely. The other part of it is, you know, it does sort of suggest with some of those like little insets about like the rarity of the types of creatures, where you might find them in the terrain, and, you know, do they travel in packs and all these different things, like what are their sort of weaknesses in that. So this a little bit more open-ended in terms of, you know, it's not really doesn't have anything to do with mechanics at all, but it gives you the opportunity then to, I think, play this in a kind of a one versus many or a dungeon master driven way, without going in and saying like, hey, let's rewrite all of the mechanical rules of the game and then, you know, have to play like a different game to play it if you want to play it as a dungeon master. And I could see the attraction to wanting to play it that way. And again, I'll restate a little bit of what I said through the walkthrough. It's like, oh yeah, that's how you should do this. You should just give people the mechanics that they can use, because the mechanics work. The mechanics are great actually for this. The combat and facing and positioning and the way the spell casting and the resting and the leveling up and all that, I think that all works fine. You know, people may have issues with, I've seen people online talk about nitpicky things in my opinion about it, but I think it works fantastically. It's one of my favorite dungeon crawlers, one of my favorite games of all time. And I think if you just kind of leave that alone, and it's like, okay, you can tell a story, and then okay, we're gonna have a combat. Let's use the League of Dungeoneers rules for combat and resolve it. Okay, sounds great to me. So this opens up that door without like getting in its own way. Now again, like I said before, maybe he's gonna come out with some Dungeon Master supplement and just make me seem stupid in retrospect. But yeah, so I think that's really cool. And I like the new playable races. That's always fun to have, and all that kind of fun stuff. So yeah, and I think the book does what it says. It's an advanced bestiary. It's not like a necessary thing. You could play just the base game, and there's tons and tons of content. You could add in the expansion. There's a ton of content there. And then if you just want to kind of, you know, update the game with some new rules and some new creatures and some new stuff and some more world building, this is perfect. It doesn't like overstay its welcome in a sense. It doesn't like come in and try to like drive crowdfunding numbers or something, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, it is what it is and knows what the heck it's supposed to be, and you can kind of take it or leave it, and it's an easy kind of to get into sort of purchase. I don't know, the only criticism I really have of it is it didn't include the New Beginnings PDF, which I mentioned in the book, but I mean, talk about splitting hairs. I think the PDF's like $6 or something. I can't remember what it was. Super cheap. And on that note, just talking out of both sides of my mouth for a second, I've seen a lot of people come up with artwork for covers, and so, you know, they just print out the PDF and spiral bound it. And there's a bunch of people on like the League of Dungeoneers Facebook group that are like, hey, here's my thing, you know, my image that you can use to print along with your book, so it looks like it's kind of more official than just a PDF of, you know, some random quest. So it has like a kind of, you know, ties the whole package together. So take a look at that too if you haven't seen that. I gotta figure out which one I want to print. But anyway, that's the Advanced Bestiary. Take a look. I think there's a little bit of a window on the pre-order here, so I think it's still a week or two left on it. So take a look, and then if you seems like you're something you're interested in, go for it. Thanks.